After her blood-soaked initiation at Rancho Santa Elena, Sara Aldrete, la Madrina, was no longer a passive observer in Adolfo Constanzo's cult. She had been baptized not in water but in pain, made to sacrifice with her own bare hands. Sara's gradual descent into darkness was methodical and ritualistic, driven under the calculated direction of Constanzo himself. Each crime the cult committed served a purpose in their twisted theology. Sara became more complicit with each ritual, and she went from being a passive participant to being a commanding presence as a spiritual executioner. The first known human sacrifices at the Rancho Santa Elena were victims Hector de la Fuente, a drug dealer, and Moises Castillo, who was a farmer. They were executed on or around the 28th of May, 1988. They were sacrificed by the cult and presented as a sacrificial offering to sanctify Rancho Santa Elena as the cult's spiritual ground and secure protection for the Hernandez drug operations. Sara, having been recently initiated, did not commit the killing herself, but she was present, and at this stage she was overseeing and organizing the ritual elements. She acted as Constanzo's right hand. She gathered items, set up the altar, and commanded lower ranking members. This marked her full entrance into cult leadership and her acceptance of human death as currency for spiritual favor. These killings established the ranch as a sacred space. The cult believed it was now shielded from law enforcement and rivals. Sara, having assisted in this pivotal rite, crossed a moral threshold that could not be undone. On the 16th of July 1988, Raul Paz Esquivel, a Mexico City transvestite and ex-lover of the cult member Jorge Montes, was killed in a horrific public dismemberment. He was a killing for revenge and ritual power. Raul was killed in a horrific public dismemberment to reinforce cult loyalty and terrorize potential defectors. Raul was tortured and dismembered under Constanzo's supervision, and his mutilated body was dumped in public. This wasn't just a sacrifice, it was a message. Sara was directly involved in orchestrating the rite. She prepared the ritual implements, helped restrain the victim, and ensured followers carried out instructions. She also helped dispose of the body and preserved key parts for the nganga. The cult's notoriety in Mexico City grew. Internally, this marked a deepening of Sara's role, not just as an assistant, but as an enforcer. She had now helped dispose of a body and participated in a death meant to instill fear. Sometime later that year, a cult member whose name was Ovidio Hernandez, along with his two sons, found themselves kidnapped, possibly by some rival cult. The cult reverted to using their ritualistic powers to secure the release of their members. Now, this cult member with his two sons, he must have been valued by the cult, and as such, they required a victim to perform their ritual sacrifice in order to appease the spirits and demand the safe return of their kidnapped family member. Around the 12th or 13th of August, they kidnapped a stranger and brought them to the ranch, where they were ritually tortured to death. The cult performed chants and blood rituals during the murder, pleading for protection and deliverance. Sara took on a more spiritual function here. She led chants, administered offerings to the nganga, and proclaimed that the success of the ritual proved her growing supernatural connection. She believed that her faith had helped return the kidnapped Hernandez men, and when Ovidio and his sons were released unharmed, the cult viewed it as divine proof that the sacrifice worked. So Sara's spiritual authority within the cult was strengthened. To her followers, she was no longer just Constanzo's lieutenant, she was a true conduit to the spirits. Constanzo had instructed the cult not to use drugs and had absolutely banned the use of substances within the cult. In November, a member of the cult was caught using drugs and was sacrificed as a lesson to the whole cult on the consequences of disobedience. Jorge Valente de Fierro Gomez was a former police officer turned cult member. He was caught by Sara himself. She was the judge on this occasion. She had been the one who reported Jorge's drug use to Constanzo and supported his execution as an act of divine justice. She oversaw the preparation and ensured the sanctity of the ritual space. Jorge was captured, bound, and ritually murdered at the ranch, his body mutilated and parts used to feed the Inganga. The act bound the followers in fear and allegiance. It also revered how Sara had now fully absorbed the cult's belief system, justifying death in the name of order and supernatural favor. The following year, between the 14th to the 25th of February, the cult sacrificed 4 people, one of whom was actually a relative of one of their own. He was killed by mistake. On this occasion, the sacrifices would serve to bless upcoming drug shipment and protect the cult's narcotics routes from law enforcement. The victims: Ezequiel Rodriguez Luna, a rival drug dealer, Ruben Villegaza, and Ernesto Rivas Diaz, and uninvited guests. Another unidentified stranger, and Jose Garcia, the 14-year-old cousin of Elio Hernandez, a fellow cult member, were abducted, tortured, and sacrificed by the cult in increasingly sadistic rituals. Their brains were removed for the Inganga, and their hearts were either eaten or burned. Constanzo would sometimes sodomize the victims before their deaths. Sara by now was deeply involved. She arranged the logistics, food, ritual tools, managing followers, and ensuring victims were prepared. She sometimes offered spiritual blessings and would consult the spirits for guidance on who should be sacrificed next. She showed no hesitation, even when the cult accidentally murdered a child relative of one of their own. These murders fueled the cult's escalating paranoia and sense of invincibility. The group moved 800 kilos of marijuana across the border, believing their rituals ensured its protection. Sara's commitment to the cause was now complete. She was a high priestess of murder, invoking spirits while blood soaked the earth beneath her very feet. The life of Mark Kilroy is a tale of a promise cut short. Mark James Kilroy was born on the 5th of March in 1968 in Chicago, Illinois, into a close-knit working-class American family. His parents, James and Helen Kilroy, were devout Catholics and deeply committed to raising their 2 sons with a strong foundation in Christian faith, discipline, and compassion. When Mark was still a child, the Kilroy family relocated to Santa Fe, Texas, a small suburban community south of Houston. This quiet town, dotted with churches, corner stores, and sprawling Texas skies, became the backdrop for Mark's formative years. From an early age, Mark displayed a bright mind and an easy, likable charm. He was athletic, intelligent, and kind, a kid who could easily move between social circles, excelling both in academics and sports. He played basketball and baseball and was involved in church activities. a reflection of the moral and spiritual structure his family instilled. But perhaps more than anything, he was known for his gentle demeanor and deep empathy for others. Teachers described him as a thoughtful and goal-oriented, someone who took responsibility seriously and often looked out for younger or struggling classmates. Mark came of age in the 1980s, an era of cultural transformation in the United States. It was a time of Reagan era conservatism, the rise of Just Say No, anti-drug campaigners, and growing suburban prosperity, but also an era of shadowy fears, the Cold War, growing cartel violence just beyond the southern border, and the media landscape flooded with stories about satanic cults and missing children. In Santa Fe, these concerns felt distant, and the Kilroy family, with their strong faith and grounded values, provided a sense of protection and purpose. By the time Mark reached high school, he had grown into a disciplined and driven young man. He graduated in the top 10% of his class and was accepted into Southwest Texas State University before transferring to the University of Texas at Austin, where he pursued a pre-medical degree. Becoming a doctor was not just a career ambition, it was an extension of his character, someone who wanted to help, to heal, and to make an impact. Friends say Mark was serious about his goals. He avoided drinking heavily and kept his priorities in order. He was focused on entrance exams, med school applications, and building a life of service. But he was also young, and like many students, he longed for moments of freedom and fun. Brief escapes from the pressures of academic life. That's what brought him to South Padre Island in March 1989 for spring break. Along with 3 close friends, he made the short trip to the Texas coast and from there crossed the border into Matamoros, Mexico, a popular destination known for its clubs, cheap drinks, and late-night revelry. Mark Kilroy would never come back. His death would uncover a level of evil no one could have imagined. But his life was marked by promise, purpose, and the quiet strength of a young man grounded in morality and hope. He stood for everything his killers did not: empathy, integrity, and light. In the end, his story became a symbol, not just of the tragedy itself, but of eternal clash between good and evil. Because when the innocent fall, it is not weakness, but the world's reminder of what should be protected. In early March 1989, Mark and 3 close college friends, Bill Huddleston, Bradley Moore, and Brent Martin, decided to take a spring break trip to South Padre Island, a Texas beach town popular with college students. They spent several days enjoying the beach, parties, and warm weather. Like many spring breakers at the time, the group decided to make a brief trip across the border to Matamoros, Mexico, just a short drive from South Padre. Matamoros was known for its clubs, cheap alcohol, and lenient atmosphere. Though there were rumors of crime, it had long been a spring break staple, and the group didn't think twice. On the evening of March 13, the 4 friends drove into Matamoros for a night out. They bar hopped, they danced, and drank modestly. As the night drew on into the early morning hours of March 14, they began heading back toward the international bridge that would take them back into Brownsville, Texas. As they approached the pedestrian bridge around 2 a.m. in the morning, the group became momentarily separated. Mark had lingered a few steps behind to relieve himself near a tree, and that's when his abductors struck. Mark was approached by members of Constanzo's cult, specifically Serafin Hernandez, Elio Hernandez, and a few others. They were prowling the streets of Matamoros looking for a suitable human sacrifice. Constanzo had recently declared that the nganga, that is, the ritual cauldron, required a superior offering to protect their latest marijuana shipment. He had specifically demanded someone who would scream, someone of high spiritual value. When they saw Mark, tall, clean-cut, white, and American, they believed he was the perfect target. The cultists pretended to be plainclothes police officers, flashing fake badges and telling Mark he was under arrest. Confused and likely thinking he was in trouble for public urination, Mark complied. He tried to escape, but he was captured again and he was shoved into a vehicle and driven away into the Mexican night. His friends met up again, but there was no sign of their friend Mark. They searched for hours and hours into the early hours of the morning. When Mark still did not show up early the next day, they reported him missing to the police. Mark was taken to Rancho Santa Elena, a secluded property roughly 20 miles outside of Matamoros. Upon getting to the ranch, the cult members left Kilroy blindfolded and handcuffed in the car overnight. In the morning, they fed him bread and water. Soon afterwards, Constanzo arrived with his men to see their victim. For the next 12 to 14 hours, he was bound, blindfolded, and imprisoned in a small shack used for holding victims. During this time, cult members prepared for the ritual. They performed chants, consulted Constanzo's tarot cards, and received instructions. Mark reportedly tried to talk his way out. He even recited the Lord's Prayer, hoping to appeal to any shred of humanity in his captors, but there was none. It was on either the 14th or 15th of March. Throughout the night, Constanzo had brutally tortured and sodomized Mark. Constanzo declared that Mark was ready for sacrifice and he ordered cult member Elio Hernandez to kill Mark with a machete. Hernandez struck his captive in the back of the head, cracking his skull open. Then Constanzo removed his brain and placed it in the inganga with his organs, believing it would strengthen the cult's spiritual shield. They cut off his legs to make it easier to bury him. They inserted a wire into his spinal column to be able to remove the spine once the body was decomposed in the earth. Mark's spinal column was later removed and used as a ritual necklace by Constanzo to ward off danger and injury. On the 14th of March 1989 was an abduction and eventual death of a tourist that sparked global interest. Mark Kilroy, a 21-year-old student at the University of Texas, was visiting Matamoros for spring break. His killing was a supreme offering. He was an Anglo victim, believed to be spiritually more powerful. Constanzo claimed the spirits demanded a high-value soul for the next drug shipment. Sara was present at the time of the abduction and helped orchestrate the ceremony. She participated in chants and supervised preparation of the inganga. While Constanzo performed the killing, Sara acted as the high priestess, guiding the ritual, interpreting the omens and declaring the sacrifice accepted. Kilroy's disappearance triggered massive international attention. Unlike previous victims, Kilroy was white, he was American, and he was well connected. His death was the beginning of the end for the cult. It exposed the group to scrutiny and eventually led authorities to Rancho Santa Elena. After Mark's murder and dismemberment, his remains were buried in a shallow grave on the ranch with at least a dozen other victims. Like the others, his body was treated as both a ritual object and waste, an act of profound desecration. Meanwhile, back in Texas, Mark's friends quickly realized he was missing. His family was alerted and reported the disappearance to the police. Over the next few weeks, the Mexican police, under heavy scrutiny, intensified border patrols and conducted interviews.